Well, we are less than a week away from the 2020 election here in America. And Bobby, this conversation about who Christians should vote for has been going on for the last several months. And just recently, Phil Vischer from VeggieTales has put out a podcast. Reverend John Piper, put out an article. And there has been just a large amount of conversation going on around this. We know that on our channel a few months ago, Frank Turek kind of weighed in on this conversation. And you and I were having a discussion, and we thought about, wow, we really need to just give a voice to what is going on from our perspective, from the 1 Minute Apologist perspective, and particularly from your perspective, about how to view all this, where we come down with some of these issues. How should we consider policy versus personality? How should we consider certain policies, how we should weigh them, and then ultimately do our best to give all of the viewers, people that are watching, just some guidance, not necessarily who to tick, but just some guidance on how they should think about walking into the voting booth and marking things off. And we know that at this point, there's been a number of people that have already cast their vote. Early voting has been going on for a few weeks, I think since last week here in North Carolina. People have been mailing in their votes for several weeks now, but there is time left to still cast a vote for a number of us. And so we wanted to weigh in. So Bobby, let's go ahead and just kick this off. Man, I think one of the most important questions has to be, is it personality that is the most important in a leader? As John Piper was saying in his article, that the leader can kind of shape some of the moral essence almost of a nation. Is it policies that we should put first? Is it kind of where we're going as a country? Or is it a combination of both of those? So maybe we'll kind of start there and we'll just kind of roll it out as the conversation goes.
Yeah, Tim, that is something that you hear a lot of the conversation going on right now. You might get some people, they don't really care about the character and the personality. They just care about the policies. You'll get others that they'll flip it. You know what? They care deeply about the character and they're not as concerned about the policies. But can these be, juxtaposed and antithetical? And I think as it relates to character, the reality is whoever we vote for is going to have a fallen character. Obviously, we're imperfect, we're sinful, but how much character should we expect for the person holding office to have? And, if I'm being honest about my personal opinion, it's not like I look at either of these candidates and think, oh, wow, what great character. Like I would want to raise my kids to emulate the character of a Biden or a Trump. Unfortunately, I don't think when we're looking at either of these candidates that you're looking at people who will go down in history for their great virtue. Nevertheless, policies is going to make a difference as well. One of the things that Piper talked about is he was struggling, right? He's kind of backing off of both, yet he's making an argument that, he doesn't want to be guilty of casting a vote for Trump, knowing that he has, character that he struggles with that's deeply flawed. And I think that you'll have a lot of demonization that's taking place, right? You'll get those who will demonize a Piper, but then you'll get others who will demonize those who will vote for one candidate over another. Ideally, you do want somebody who has good principles and good policies, and those are integrated. Unfortunately, we're left with kind of this two-party system for the most part, and the candidates that are there don't always emulate what we're looking for. Now, as it relates to myself, I would feel more comfortable realizing that, you've got two people, neither of them have the character that you would feel good about, yet you can definitely realize the kind of policies that they're going to uphold and what that would mean for the future of America. And that should play a role in the way that we think on this matter. And so I think that, yes, both do matter. It's not good to say, oh, it's just policy. And I think that if anybody does have character, then they're going to have, policy that's going to, be hopefully, thought out in a way that's going to be best for our citizens and our society that we live in. What are your thoughts on that, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think one of the things that David French, if people are familiar, if they're involved in this political conversation, they're
Exactly.
familiar with someone like David French. One of his big criticisms over the last few years has been that the Southern Baptist Convention, which is one of the largest Protestant Christian organizations, came out in the late 90s against Clinton's character because of what he did in office, what he did while he was in office, and then his subsequent lying about that. And now David French is scratching his head and saying, but it seems like you've flipped. It seems like that doesn't necessarily matter anymore. So I think for me, one of the hard things is the counter argument to that would be that what Clinton didn't happened in the office of the presidency, and to our knowledge right now, that same infidelity has not necessarily happened in the office that we know of. But there are other larger character flaws of Trump. He is very brash. He is a very direct individual. He does use insults a lot. He does use mockery a lot. And again, as John Piper pointed out in that article, there are some significant character issues with Trump, apart from the sexual deviance of the past, right? So again, as I'm thinking about this, I don't necessarily want to give Trump on any level a pass for any of those things, but I do want to contextualize it. So how should Christians perhaps contextualize some of Trump's misdeeds in the past and weigh those against the possible good policies that he has done? We can point to some positive policies that he has put forth over the last few years. How should we weigh those?
Yeah, it gets tricky, doesn't it? I mean, when you're trying as a Christian to weigh all that out, I mean, one of the things I listened to Eric Metaxas debate with David French, and they're at opposite ends of the spectrum there, and you've got Eric Metaxas kind of building out an argument for why Trump, and then you've got David French, why not Trump, and why we shouldn't vote for Trump. I think that his point is true that, with Clinton, there wasn't moral outrage amongst the evangelical community in the situation with like a Monica Lewinsky. I mean, here we have a 22-year-old intern, and there's oral sex taking place in the Oval Office. And that's not the first president where we've had these problems, right? Moral issues. I would say with Trump, the contention is he seems to be unrepentant from French's standpoint. Like, he hasn't seemed to apologize. You're paying off, people who you've been with in the past to keep silent on that. And so that's problematic. And so that's where Piper comes in and says, there doesn't seem to be a lot of repentance here. And I would say, you know what, that would be nice if that would have been, publicly talked about. We don't know his personal heart. We don't know that he hasn't repented. He does try to take on more of an optimistic tone in his approach to things, doesn't he? And so we do see that as it relates to what he's upholding at. What I can say is I thought that Metaxas brought out a good point when you look at the policies that he promised to uphold. And Trump has said, look, I said I would do this, I'm doing this. I said I would do that, I'm doing that. And so that's a nice feature where I will say, even at the outset, I'm an independent, and I did not vote for Trump, and I didn't vote for Hillary either in the last election. I have found myself as one of those guys that was looking at this and feeling like, man, where Trump was at 4 years ago, feeling some struggle, like I just didn't feel good about it. But when you look at some of the policies that he's enforced, and I started thinking about, okay, you know what, what candidate whose values are going to more correspond to Scripture? And no candidate is going to perfectly correspond to Scripture, right? God's kingdom is not of this world. Voting is our right, and it's a privilege that we have as Christians, and we want to be as informed as we possibly can be. And we think about these candidates, and we consider Biden, and we consider Trump, and we think about which kind of a candidate would enforce policies that would reflect our values the most. Not perfectly, because they're not going to be that way, right? That's the church's job, to reflect the kingdom life. That's the church's job, to raise up disciples. Nevertheless, we have to vote our values as much as we can.
Yeah, I think this is a good time maybe to kind of bring out some of the scriptural understanding of government, because I think that is a significant divide between not necessarily Biden and Trump, although I think there's elements of that, but between views of governance. And I saw a picture meme the other day on Facebook that said something along the lines of, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, that the Democrats or the left, if you want to categorize them as that, we want health care. We want people to be fed. We want kids not separated at the border, and so on. And all of these very virtuous things. And as I read down the list, I said, yes, 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 yes. I wanted all of those things. Now, I think the difference between where this person was at and where I was coming from was, is it the responsibility of the government to be able to provide those things? Or is it the responsibility of Christ followers, the church, the body of Christ? Is it the responsibility of neighbors, being neighborly, to help respond to some of those needs? So maybe draw out as best you can your understanding of the nature of government as laid out. Again, we could do a whole show on this, but generally, in the Old Testament and then subsequently in the New Testament, Romans 13 talks about the role of government and whatnot. So how would we look at that?
Well, Tim, under the Old Covenant, right? I mean, you've got this theocracy in place, and that creates some confusion for people, because they'll read the law, they'll read Leviticus, they'll read Deuteronomy, and they'll think about, how do we contextualize these books today, and how do these rules and laws apply today? Well, we need to understand that under a theocracy, where Israel was under God, Yahweh, that there was a standard by which God had put in place to show forth something about his holiness, right? So much of the law code was to depict God's holiness, to show that we fall short of it. Then with the new covenant, when Jesus comes on the scenes, well, what do we see? We see, that it's, under the rule of Roman emperors at that time. And Paul in Romans 13, as you rightfully said, that talks about the governing authorities. They do not carry the sword in vain. Paul even said on one occasion, hey, if I've done anything worthy of the death penalty, I don't resist that. So in other words, he could recognize the role of government in realizing even capital punishment in the particular society that he lived in. And he didn't see himself above that because he was a Christian. And so, Jesus says, render unto Caesar's what is the Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. And I think that as Christians, our responsibility is to pray for our governing leaders. Our responsibility is to do our best as a church, to kingdom life now. I think that our responsibilities is ultimately missional, right? We are to share the gospel of Jesus. Nevertheless, as we do seek to vote our values, we hope that we can show that, the kind of culture that God would have for us by the kingdom life that we live is going to bear more fruit and less consequences than a culture that's not going to be concerned about morals. And so we don't live under a theocracy. That doesn't mean that God's not reigning and ruling. He is, but we live in a democracy. And so where we live in our own culture, there's various governments throughout the world. And we all have to figure out, what does our Christian faith look like with the particular government that we have? Government styles can come and go. They'll change. But God's given us a vision for the church that we are to be obedient to, faithful to, regardless of what happens. So you think about Daniel, for example, being taken to captivity. You know what? He was used in a great way right there in a pagan culture in Babylon. He didn't compromise on his own beliefs, yet nevertheless, he had an influence. Isaiah was able to get before all sorts of world leaders during his time. He was like a Billy Graham of his time, talking to world leaders. And so that's really encouraging. So there's a way that we can be influential as Christians, and we don't have to be obnoxious. And some of what I hope we'll talk about today too, Tim, is just our tone and our spirit. We're so divided. People get so worked up when Christians talk about politics, and Christians get worked up when others talk about politics. And you know what? We should be able to dialogue. We should be able to talk. We should be able to share our opinions. And guess what? My goal should not be to get everybody to 100% agree with me right now. That's not what I'm trying to do here. We should be able to accept each other, whether we agree with one another or not. We're so used to demonizing each other in the kind of culture that we live in today. And that's really unfortunate. And I don't think that that's, if so you're saying, what should our response be to government in a culture like ours today? And what would the Bible lead us to understand? Well, we need to make sure that we're careful with our words. We need to make sure that we shine. We need to make sure we don't lose our witness. We need to make sure that we remember that America and Christianity aren't one and the same. We need to make sure that we remember that God's vision for us is bigger than politics. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that we throw politics out the window. I see one person saying, I should not tell people, Elliot C., how to vote. I don't even feel like I'm telling people how to vote. I'm helping people to think about how we should go about thinking about it, but not who to vote for. That I think that should become more clear the more we think about the biblical values that we are called to uphold in our particular culture. So, we need to be able to have these conversations, and we need to not feel threatened by it. And I'm okay if people are on different sides of the spectrum. It doesn't mean we demonize each other.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And again, if we're looking at the chat, Jason, we're going to talk about Lady Gaga song that had some significance to it. I don't know if we'll get to that. I don't know if it's high on the priority list, but in our pre-show conversation, we thought maybe this isn't the direction that we should go tonight after we had already put the graphic up. So we might address Lady Gaga, but if we're here to hear a conversation about Lady Gaga, we might push that off just a little bit. So I'm sorry to disappoint. I know our numbers right now. People are just going to sign off. That's it. I'm not talking about Lady Gaga. Hey, but we thought with the election looming that we would again give some principled thoughts to kind of surround some of this conversation. Bobby, we released a video on our channel just yesterday, actually, about. Are You a White Supremacist was the title of the video. And anyone that's watching this video, I would challenge you to go check that video out. But one of the things that was highlighted by a blog in that was your call to civility, your call to be able to discern definitions properly and to use that as a way that we can walk forward. And so you had kind of just alluded to this, you foreshadowed this, you set me up nicely for this question. So what are some of the things that we need to keep in mind as we dialogue with others that may disagree about our voting habits, if you will? No matter what side we're on, no matter who we end up casting the vote for, what are some things that we need to keep in mind as we go into those dialogues?
Well, people are more important than our policies. And I think that we're living in a time right now, Tim, where our policies are more important than people. And people are created in the image of God. And as Christians, we need to remember that. And while we remember that people are more important than policies, some people will hold to some really bad policies. And that puts us in a tough spot. What are we to do? Well, we should speak out. We should talk about this, and we should dialogue it. We don't sweep it under the rug. We don't ignore it. Nevertheless, we still value people as created by God. And I think that is something that is so important. Whenever I hear like sweeping statements like all Democrats are bad or all Republicans are bad or there's no such good that can come out of the Democratic Party, there's no such good that can come out of the Republican Party, I realize that that's the person who's being unobjective. Because there's going to be some good and some bad in all of us. You know what? The image of God was not erased. It was defaced in us. And sure, there'll be some groups that will be more deviant than other groups. Nevertheless, when we just demonize and make everything about somebody or a particular party completely evil, I fear that we lose our objectivity, and that doesn't help us to communicate with people. And so I think one thing that we can do is we need to try to listen to the opposite side. We need to be able to we're even if you're a Democrat or if you're a Republican, try to listen to the other side. It's so easy to preach to the choir. It's so easy to get people to give you amens, to just say the things. If you want to go find a camp of people that believe exactly like you do, you can say it loudly, you can pound the pulpit. But if we're going to figure out a way to unify our country, we're going to have to figure out how to listen. And so we have to listen. We have to validate. We have to remember that the people that we're listening to, they're a product of the books that they've read, the mentors that they had, the education that they've had, the experience that they had, the parenting, their traumas, their upbringing. And as we listen and we remember that, hey, we sit there and go, well, what if I would have had those traumas? What if I would have been raised like that? What if I would have been in a school situation like that? Maybe I wouldn't see things the way that I see them. And then that allows us to see people as people and to be able to say, okay, let's talk. So we got to be able to and our identity is not in our policies. Our identity is in God. He created us. So we have to be able to not put our identity so wrapped up in our policies, but rather we have to remember that when we're talking, the idea is out here, and let's dialogue about it and let's converse about it. We don't even know how to have simple conversations. Like you go on like YouTube and Twitter feed and all that stuff. We just blast each other and we sit behind our computers and we're like tough guys. Like, oh, you're a tough guy, right? You gave your big tough statement. You're a tough guy. Well, anybody can do that, right? It takes a lot more character to be patient enough to listen to somebody, to value somebody, to try to hear their heart. Now, until we can there's no way forward as a country if the left's going to sit on the left and just demonize the right, and the right's going to sit on the right and just demonize the right. Now, I can imagine some people saying, well, Bobby, you know what? You sound liberal. You're wanting to listen. I think it sounds Christian that we would try to be salt and light, that we try to listen. It's like today with the video that came out. You saw it, Tim. Somebody put, that Bobby must be a liberal Christian. And certainly he believes in same-sex marriage based on this video I did. And the funny thing is, I'm like, nothing could be further from the truth. I'm a conservative.
Right.
I believe in heterosexual marriage. I believe that sex has a context. So the funny thing is just because my tone was trying to be as one of a unifier, I was viewed as a liberal. Now that shouldn't be the case. That should not be the case. So like even right now, KL says, Bobby sounds like he's sipping critical race theory. You see how premature and judge like we've done videos about how I'm against critical race theory.
Right. Yeah. We did a whole show with Neil Shenvi on that, unpacking that and why it's detrimental to the church. And Neil Shenvi was giving advice to pastors on how to ward this off from your congregation and how to have conversations with people that hold to that. Yeah. Right.
So KL, you don't even know what you're talking about. Right. You're saying I sound like I'm sipping from critical race theory, and you need to go sip a little bit of a video that we've done on this thing.
Right.
So that's not the case.
Right. No, you're exactly right.
See, some people have to be so aggressive, so strong, so boom, boom, boom. They get nervous if you even seem like you're listening a little bit, if you're willing to try to understand. And I think that until we can understand what motivates people, right? We can just sit there. It's really easy. Let's just demonize the other side. Let's just demonize the other side. That's easy.
Yeah.
That doesn't take any thinking. It doesn't take any trying to listening. Listen, we live in a cancel culture, Tim, and this is a soapbox of mine. The cancel culture, and you know what? It's not just the left. It's like it's some people on the right as well. Like, oh my goodness, if you do not preach to the choir, I can't handle it. I'm out of here. Get me out of here. And so what ends up happening is the cancel culture it's a intellectual weakness. We should be able to be secure enough in our own belief systems that we can listen to other people and we can disagree with other people. If we have to write somebody off to make a world in which everybody thinks like I do, believes like I do, feels like I do, sees the world like I do, well, that might be utopia, but that's all it is. It's utopia. It's not real. And we have to quit canceling each other off and give one another an opportunity to be real. And we got to get away from stuff like KL, where people make these assumptions without even looking at the context. And people do that all the time. When I came out with my book, The Fifth Gospel, The Blaze did a review on it. Mm-hmm. And it says, Pastors Reveals Another Gospel. That was the title of the article as my book, The Fifth Gospel, came out. And you could see the feed. Oh, this guy's a heretic. And I'm thinking, you guys are gutting your very own. You're missing the whole point. The point of the fifth gospel is we can't lose our witness in this culture. But we form opinions on sound bites. We form opinions on blurbs. And people are bigger than a soundbite. And people are bigger than a blurb. And people have a context, and we've got to understand the context if we're going to be able to move forward as a culture.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. So I'm gonna do my best to maybe meet KL's challenge here, and I think one of the hard parts about that challenge, KL, is that really it comes from a value system. And so the idea of something like restrictions on gun rights, so maybe making it more difficult to get guns, maybe not a gun buyback. I know that Biden and Kamala have been talking about some sort of buyback program, whatever, but at least initially kind of the Democratic Party has this idea that there should be a little bit more restrictions. It should be harder for people to get guns that shouldn't have guns, people with mental health issues, that may be violent, former criminals, and so on. So when I'm talking to my friends that I've known cast a vote for Biden already or are planning to vote for Biden, that's one of their main concerns. Their main concern is the idea that there should be more restrictions on that. Now, I don't necessarily agree with them, but I can understand their perspective. I can understand where they're coming from and why they see that as a valid point that there should be more restrictions. So again, that's just one, but I think it comes from a different perspective, a different value system from maybe a more conservative or even maybe a more constitutional viewpoint. Again, I know I'm kind of throwing stones, but if I look at the Second Amendment and try to unpack what the Second Amendment means, I would say that there's not a whole lot of space for these massive amounts of restrictions. Bobby, weigh in on that. Can you think of any, kind of mainstream Democratic, policy platform, not even maybe that Joe Biden is putting out there, but that you could say, yeah, I think this is maybe something that I don't necessarily hold to as a high value, but that I can see how people might hold that as a high value?
Well, when you start thinking about like some of the environmental issues or, and man, I don't even know where to land on some of this, like global warming, not global warming. And I just go, man, I put my hands up and I go, that's just not my area of expertise, right? Global warming. Do I think that's the greatest moral issue of our day? No. When you think about other social justice issues, though, like taking care of the poor, then you're getting into like a difference of opinion about how you go about helping the poor. I do think that that's a good value, that to be able to figure out how you help the poor. But the danger is if helping the poor means you just give them handouts all the time, does that really help the poor? So I think what can happen sometimes is on the left, hey, we got to help the poor. And then, the right looks at it and goes, oh, you're just giving handouts and that's not going to help them. But then on the right, they'll almost seem insensitive sometimes to those issues. And so how do we, put together social justice issues that take care of the poor, those who are in poverty? Like, for example, you mentioned a little bit ago, like, yes, the church, that's a great place to start, right? Like the church should really be engaged in helping the poor. But, if the government wants to help with that, that can be okay. I can envision certain situations where somebody, they just had a really rough going at it and some help could be great, but are they always on that help? And are there any conditions to the help that's been given to them? And how do we think through that stuff? That can be tricky. So I think that if you're talking to one another, like, hey, I think just a good question is, why are you pro-life? Or why are you pro-choice? Like, you listen, like, I'm clearly pro-life, but if I was talking to somebody who was pro-choice, I could lose the opportunity to connect and to build a relationship and really talk about what's the best way for us to view this. by just writing the person off, or I could say something like, why are you pro-choice? And you start listening to their sentiments and you talk about it. And then we start to be able to dialogue on why that is fundamentally wrong. Like, for example, even, I'm so thankful for the technology that we have today. I mean, we've got all the technology where you can see through ultrasounds and stuff. I mean, it's becoming very, very convincing to people that, you know what, that baby right there, it's a baby in the womb. But you know what people are doing now is they're saying, well, that might be a baby. Like, life begins at conception, but personhood doesn't. So now you got the left. Well, why can you all of a sudden distinguish personhood from life? It sounds desperate here, right? And so I think that we should give the benefit of the doubt. I like how Mark Middleberg, when we had him on the One Minute Apologist, he talked, I think it was about his wife when she was a little girl. She was riding with her grandpa, and her grandpa was going down the street, and he saw a cardboard box that was constructed in the middle of the road. And he slowed down, and up came this toddler. And he gave the benefit of the doubt. He didn't run the cardboard box over. Up came the child. I go, well, that's a great argument that Mark was sharing that you could share with someone who's pro-choice. Okay, even if there's a small chance that this is a person in the womb, shouldn't we give the benefit of the doubt, right? And so I think that there's conversations to be had, but if all we're going to do is yell at each other and demonize each other, we can't have the conversation. We can preach to the choir, but I want to do more than preach to the choir. And so I think that we can listen and have compassion for one another without compromising. So, for example, we could hear somebody, I'm sure, like sometimes people grew up with horrific situations, like, and as a result of the way they grew up, they view the world in a way that's different than us. But if we understand the way that they grew up, their situation, and we can validate some of their pain, well, then we're building a bridge. Like somebody said, oh, you know, light can't unify with the darkness. Well, we're not talking about unifying, like becoming completely one, but we need to be able to converse with the darkness. Jesus conversed with the darkness all the time. He was hanging out with gluttons and sinners and prostitutes, and they accused him of being a glutton and a drunkard. So I think that, you know, some people's approach is like, you know, we need to be separatists. But I think we need to engage the culture that we live in, and engage in the culture that we live in means that we have to know how to talk to the people in a way that we can build relationships, not just demonize.
Right. No, you're exactly right. And I'll tell just a quick story. I was having a conversation back and forth on Facebook on Saturday, and almost immediately I was trying to discern what their view of the unborn was. Did they view it as a human that is deserving of equal rights, particularly the equal right to life, or did they have kind of a flexible view of personhood, if you will? And probably 2 or 3 comments into this conversation, the person just referred to me as a monster. Like, Tim, you're a monster. And that was really hard to then carry on the conversation, but we tried. We actually took it off the thread. We went to a messenger conversation. And I will say, to this person's credit, and I won't necessarily name their name, they did come back the next day and message me and said, was a little drunk last night when we were having that conversation. Please forgive me for that. I'm like, man, I wish I would have the humility to come back and say I said some things I shouldn't have said sometimes. And sometimes those conversations happen in social media or even in person, and it's hard to circle back around to that. So maybe let's just stick on this area of the right to life and abortion. We had a picture on our Facebook wall a few weeks ago that said that Christians need to be a voice for the voiceless. And that quote was pulled from one of the articles that are on our blog about abortion and kind of some of the stats and statistics and where our culture has come. And that blog post was written a number of years ago, but a lot of that is still true. So, Bobby, how should we view the idea of the right to life or the unborn, or this idea of abortion or women's rights or, you know, reproductive health, as sometimes it's referred to, when we're going to the voting booth? How important of an issue should this be? How should we view some of just kind of some of the overall policies that have been put out there? Let's kind of maybe just walk down this road.
Yeah, let's do that. And go ahead and block Joshua Thomas while we're doing it, because it seems like he's just got a bunch of emojis he wants to show us. Right. That said, Tim, I would say, look, I mean, biblically, I don't I really have a hard time understanding how a Christian could come to a place and be pro-choice. Okay. Um, I think that a Christian could be loving to somebody else that's pro-choice, but I think that the Bible is pro-life. Now, I know that some would say, well, pro-life in the womb and pro-life out of the womb. And I'd say, yes, I get that. But pro-life in the womb. And, I would say, for example, even in, you could be driving to get an abortion. And what could happen is you could get hit by a drunk driver. And the drunk driver, if your baby died and the woman died, the drunk driver could be charged for double homicide. But the woman, had she not got hit by the drunk driver, could show up and abort the baby. Now, there's something fundamentally off here. Okay. Now, I would say, where can we be empathetic? So somebody is raped and you go, man, well, that is horrible, right? I mean, if somebody's raped, they get pregnant, we can validate that. We can say, I'm so sorry. That is horrific. I can't imagine that. But we do have adoption, right, as an option. And so we can steer somebody toward adoption. And so I remember being at a pro-life walk, and out in front of the abortion clinic, there was a girl holding a poster and it said, "Girls just want to have fun." That was heartbreaking. So some people, they just go, it's just easier. Girls just want to have fun. That was one perspective, but that was a heartbreaking perspective right there to see. So I would say, we as Christians need to value the fact that the baby is a baby, like changing the location from inside the womb to outside of the womb, changing the environment does nothing to instill personhood. Right. And so that's the danger. God gives us personhood. We're created in God's image. And so we should value life. And so I'm so thankful for the ministries out there that are pro-life. And we've done several videos on pro-life on our channel. And so, the whole, it's my body. And what about my body? And I have a right to my own body. Well, your body, in this situation, you have another body that has a right to its body. And so I think that abortion should not be a solution in our culture. There's one situation where I could see it, and it would be if the mother's going to die and and they clearly know it without a shadow of a doubt, they're like, she's going to die and you're going to lose both. That can be just a horrific situation. I can't even imagine being in that. And I would not make that ethical choice for somebody. But I can imagine if I was in a situation and my wife was pregnant and they're like, she's got about 60 seconds left to live. She's going to be dead and you're going to lose your child as well. I could see in a situation like that where somebody could make that horrible decision and it would just be awful. But the excuses of back alley rapes, the excuse of, this is just our body, or I'm just not ready for it yet. I don't think that those fare well. I don't think that that values the life in the womb. And I think that it is a life in the womb. And I think that we need to recognize that if we don't want to keep the child, that there are other options like adoption, and we should be all about that.
Yeah, so I'm really good friends with the CEO of an organization called Emma's Footprints, and what Emma's Footprints does is they help families who had child and infant loss up to a year. And one of the conversations that I was having with some of their families was this idea that the Virginia law and the New York law of abortion up to the time of birth, they said, look, you as a male can never understand the horror, the shame, the guilt, the immense sadness that somebody could have when their baby is terminal, right? When it's developing without a brain, or it doesn't have a heart and it's just not going to live, but then they have to carry it, right? So, man, I can't even put myself in that position where, a mother who's 7 months pregnant and somebody walks up with all the joy and says, "Oh my gosh, you're pregnant. That's awesome. And that's great," or whatever. And that person knows that this baby will never have a life outside of a few minutes outside of the womb at all because of some developmental or genetic abnormality or something like that. And so the argument that I've heard is, yes, Tim, but so we have to allow for some of those types of things because they are horrific, and that's really what that law is there for. And when I actually went and looked at the...
Not when we look at the numbers.
When I went and looked at the actual law, I said, look, I might be, I'll kind of hedge my bets here, I might be more for that if the law was written in a way that it said, if the baby is 100% non-viable, if it's guaranteed that this baby is not going to live outside of the womb at all, that is the only case that this would be right and good and be able to take place. And even then, again, I'll say I hedge my bets just because I haven't gone completely down that rabbit hole. But you and I both know that the statistics show that that's not necessarily the case, that there are a number of late-term abortions, far too many late-term abortions that are outside of that specific category. And that does terrify me, and in a lot of senses, sickens me and that end. And so, yeah, I think that's something that we still have to continue to talk about. And it's still something that we have to continue to change the culture, not necessarily just change the law, but having pro-life people in office should have an effect on the culture.
Yeah, no, for sure, Tim. I mean, you think of over 50 million, close to 60 million. I don't remember what the latest statistic is on abortion since 73 with the passing of Roe v. Wade. It's unbelievable. Now, let me just bring one point out, though, Tim. KL says, Tim, you can give it another try if Bobby can't think of anything. One good point about the Democratic Party platform. KL, our point here is not to try to bring out good points about either side. I'm clearly a conservative, but just be let's say, KL, your point's right. There's not one good thing about the Democratic Party. Let's just say that's the case. Not one thing. Okay. Does that mean we shouldn't try to communicate with one another? Does that mean we shouldn't try to listen to one another? Does that mean we shouldn't try to understand why it is that people on the left hold the viewpoint that they do? Like Tim was just saying, I've had people talk to me about abortion and they've given me these scenarios. Are we not going to listen, KL, to people? Are we just going to say there's nothing good? Aren't we glad that there's none good, no, not one, that Jesus came, that God demonstrated his love for us in this while we were still enemies. Christ died for us. Nothing good in me. Jesus died on the cross. Jesus came to redeem us. And so I would say we cannot put politics ahead of the gospel. And that is part of the problem right here. I'm trying to say that, yes, I am a conservative. We're talking about abortion. I'm saying I'm pro-life. But one of the things that I can say that I'm thankful for is I feel like I've got friends that would be on the opposite side where I would vote, and we get along and we connect and we can have a conversation. And it's because we have some relational skills to connect and we don't have to demonize each other. And I think that that's unhealthy. If all you have is just a bunch of conservative friends in your life, or all you have is just a bunch of liberal friends in your life, or all you have is just a bunch of white friends in your life, or all you have is just a bunch of black friends in your life, then we are not coming together to figure out how we can learn and listen to each other. And so that's important. If all you have is just straight friends in your life, but you've never talked to a homosexual, but you just make all your judgments. Listen, sex has a context between a man and a woman in marriage. But guess what? I've been invited into homosexuals' homes for dinner. My family's been invited over. We can converse. Why is that? Because we still can remember that people are created in the image of God, that God still loves them, that they're fearfully and wonderfully made. And it doesn't mean we agree with one another in these situations. It means we're trying to connect with one another. And the other thing I'd say is, I don't think that I have it all together. I've changed my own opinions on things. And I think that it's healthy to listen to people of differing opinions. It helps us to be sharp. It helps us to not be ultra bulldogmatic. It's so easy to be self-righteous and just look down on other people and to think we've got the right way and we've got the right views. I am not saying by the fact that we need to learn to communicate and talk and not cancel each other that I'm sitting here saying, this particular party's good and this particular party's bad, or this party's all bad or all good. That's not the point. The point is we need to figure out how to communicate. We don't know how to communicate.
Right. So I think that's a great point. I think maybe we can come back to that. Rudy mentioned earlier on, asked, does the president have to listen to godly counsel when he is the next president? So maybe where does godly counsel come into that top tier of leadership in companies, in churches, at the top of the leadership advice, or top of our leadership in this country? Where does godly counsel kind of come into that? How should we think about that?
Well, I'm thankful that, that our president currently is open to godly counsel. I mean, I know that, like, for example, I was at Harvest Fellowship this past weekend, and Greg Laurie was preaching, and he got COVID, right, while being at the Oval Office, and the president was asking for prayer. And Greg Laurie said, some people don't like the thought that I would go and pray for our president. He said, I don't care what political position our president has. If they're asking for prayer, I'm going to pray. And so he was willing to pray for the president. And so I think that that's good that he's willing to listen to evangelicals share their opinion. That's a good thing. So I would hope that for all presidents. But I would say this, though, Tim, I think that it's okay for a president to listen to lots of people, because he's not just marrying Christians, or he's not just leading Christians. He's leading American people who are diversified. So he should be listening, or she should be listening to, different viewpoints, not just the Christians. What are the atheists saying? What are the Mormons saying? What are the Muslims saying? And then it's his responsibility to uphold his promises that he was voted in for, and to lead out in that way. So I don't think that a president should only be listening to Christians, because I don't think we live in a theocracy. And that's not what I'm trying to get here. I'm going to vote my opinions. I'm going to vote my viewpoints. I am a Christian. And I think that as Christians, that's our right. But I think when we start thinking as Christians that others need to all think just like we do, that's different inside the church, right? Like when you're in a church, you have you have a set of doctrine, you have a set of moral beliefs that you ascribe to. But how do we live amongst each other in our culture? That can be challenging, right? And it can mean that we have to listen to one another, and not just so the president should listen to Christians, but he should listen to non-Christians as well, because he needs to lead all of the Americans.
Right. Yeah. And I agree. I would definitely affirm that. And I'd also say that the president should listen to truth, right? So where truth is, the president should listen to that. Where leaders find truth, they should move in that direction. And, we've talked a number of times on our channel about how we believe that Christianity is a truth, and that his name is Jesus, and that means that there isn't necessarily this hard dichotomy between science and faith, and science and reason. And so the president should be listening to scientists. The president should be listening to great economists when he makes his decision. He should be listening to his cabinet and council if they're pursuing truth, and where truth is at. They should be continuing to walk towards the truth in all aspects, in all cases. And leadership is tough. Leadership is difficult. That doesn't necessarily give any leader a pass for their shortcomings or not listening to the truth. There is an egotistical nature that comes with leadership sometimes that can be very difficult to put down. And so that's my own. I'm not pointing fingers to anybody else. I know when I'm in those leadership positions, that can be very difficult when you're given that ability to have some say in other people's life and have some influence. And so I can't imagine being in that position of leadership at that kind of level at all, and what that would mean.
I can't either. I mean, it'd just be daunting. And one of the things that I'd want to say too is, like, I'm not seeing myself as like some authority here on exactly how we need to go about things. I'm just wanting to have a conversation, and people can take it or leave it, right? We should be good Bereans. Go back to the scriptures. If I'm just really stepping back, Tim, I'm just trying to think about what are some principles here. Well, as Christians, we don't live in a theocracy. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to be prayerful. We need to think, we need to know who we're voting for. We need to know what their positions are. We need to be able to think about who would lead in such a way as to most reflect what our kingdom culture would look like. Who holds the values that would be closest to the Bible? Like, again, Democrats, Republicans, with those, if those are our options, I mean, we're not going to find a perfect fit, right, at all. So we should be aware of what it is that somebody holds to and what the cost is. If you're going to vote for this person versus this person, we need to know what our values are. So, I mean, take sexuality, take abortion, take the poor, take the environment. Can we force rank those issues? What does this candidate say about these issues? What does that candidate say about these issues? And then how do we go in and vote about this? And so I'm saying, I just want to enter the conversation. We have a channel. We have some subscribers there, and some of them are on listening, and we're dialoguing, and we're just trying to think, what can we think about biblically as it relates? I mean, our culture's changing so fast right now too. I mean, we've been through a lot since COVID. I mean, be honest with you. I mean, I've gone a little nuts myself during COVID. I mean, this is a hard time, right? I mean, I feel trapped. I'm living in California. I feel like everything's shut down. I mean, the governor Newsom recently, I mean, he's literally telling you to like put your mask up in between bites. You can't have more than, a certain amount of family members over. You can't be together for more than 2 hours. You got to meet outside. You've got to be 6 feet apart while you're eating together. I mean, that feels oppressive to me, right? When I start thinking about all that. So there's a lot of people, they're just struggling right now. We have to know, like when I think about the left versus the right, it seems like the left, you got an emerging communism. That's Marxism that's on the way up right now. That concerns me, right? Black Lives Matter. That whole thing that went through, Black Lives do matter. I don't think people are even contesting that, but the organization that had some concerns. It was rooted in Marxism. We've done several videos on this. Yep. And I've even interviewed Black friends of mine to talk about it, who would fundamentally say the organization is off, but they would get the sentiment, right? So you've got, pro-choice, you got the deconstruction of the family. These things concern me about our future and as a family. And I'm admitting that that's a problem for me, but I want to have a conversation of what's going on here. Why is that? What would create a better culture? And without canceling each other. That's, you don't have to agree with me. And I don't have to agree with you, but my goodness, shouldn't we be able to go out to coffee and just enjoy community and fellowship? Like I don't want to be reduced to only being able to have fellowship with people who think just like me. Because the fact of the matter is I don't always think like my 2000 self does not think like my 2020 self.
Right. Yes. And that's good. And that's somewhat, again, by design and the Christian context, that we should be sanctifying and growing and continuing to have our mind renewed, Romans 12 and all of that. So, Bobby, I think that was a fantastic discussion, fantastic points right there at the end. Maybe let's just take a few minutes here and talk a little bit about the Pope, kind of taking a slight left turn, but it is a significant cultural issue that I think that your voice is needed in. And so maybe to set this context up a little bit, the Pope was in an interview, kind of in a private interview. It came out that the Pope had said something along the lines of that civil unions between homosexual couples might be okay. And again, there's lots of hedging there because it was translated. It was a closed door meeting, so it's not necessarily firsthand. It's not from the Pope's mouth to the microphone in English or whatnot. So just kind of give us maybe some of the context there, the broader context there, and then let's, weigh in on that for us, please. How should we think about that?
Yeah, it seems like this was a statement that was supposed to be swept under the rug, and then this emerging documentary comes out and the statement's revealed, and it's created quite the backsplash for the Pope, no doubt. I think that when we hear a statement like that, we have to ask, well, what's going on there? And so this isn't, from what I understand, being put into any like ultra dogma in the teachings of the Catholic Church. So he's sharing something that he thinks. Not only that, I don't think he's changed his position that sex is between a male and a female in the context of marriage. So I think he's seeing this church position and he's upholding biblically, sex between a man and a woman in the context of marriage. I think he's seeing something happen as a cultural phenomenon and saying, should homosexuals be alienated? And he's saying, no, they should have civil union and they should have certain protections as that relates. So that's going to be a tricky thing for Christians, because there's an element where absolutely, I think about, man, if I'm a pastor, and again, my stance is the Bible is clear. But the Bible talks a lot more about heterosexual sin, by the way, than it does homosexual sin. So, we, in our fallen natures too, I believe we all have, if you've reached puberty, we all know what it's like to struggle with sexual temptation. Okay. Some people have heterosexual temptation. Others have homosexual temptation. It's the acting out on this, right? And so biblically speaking, I don't think there's any place for the church to look at the scriptures and say, oh, marriage is between a man and a man, or a woman and a woman. I think that what Matthew Vines has done in reinterpreting it is off. So I think that it's clear there. I do think that we live in a culture like in America where it's legalized, and we're going to have to ask ourselves, well, how are we going to I can personally have my view as a Christian. I could vote my beliefs as a Christian, but I can still exist in a culture, and I do. And everybody that's an American is existing in a culture where same-sex marriage exists.
Right.
It's further than civil unions, right? It's same-sex marriage. And so I think that there's some people, they're just trying to figure out how, and I think it's really, really tricky, because I think that you've got the church is supposed to be the hope of the world, not the world is the hope of the church. So we have to show what it looks like to be the hope of the world, and we hold up our values. But there are times where I think the danger for the Pope, where some people are going to struggle, is they're going to say he shouldn't see that they should have civil union freedoms, even though that's what he has said. And the danger that could be for some would be, well, are you holding these people to Christian standards if they're not Christians? But the reality is we do still have the moral law within us. And so God is going to hold us accountable for the moral law for conscience within us. So there's no one without excuse, according to Romans chapter 1. But I think you're going to see more of this. Like, okay, civil union is okay for homosexual couples in other countries, or in our culture. I could see that you're going to see pastors saying, you know what, I don't think the Bible says this is, the Bible does not permit homosexual marriage. It holds a traditional, view of marriage. And this is the way we hold it as a church. But we also live in a culture that does have same-sex marriage. And how are we going to live with that? And how are we going to work together? And what is that going to look like? And I think one thing that's happened is there's been so many fast decisions over the last several years. Like, we are devolving it morally as a culture. We're making decisions that are so catastrophic so quickly that I don't even think we've had time to really process, what does this look like missionally for us as a church? How are we going to reach out to people? Because we don't just want to be seen as bigots and homophobes in a culture, but we don't want to compromise on what the Bible has to say about biblical issues. So how do we go about this, reaching this new culture that we're in? I think that's going to be tricky. I think the last thing I'd say is regarding the Pope, it's going to be some of the third world countries that have just went with traditional marriage all those years that it might affect the most. Again, we're already beyond civil union, right? Like we have same-sex marriage. But the Pope's statement, I think the concern is that's going to open Pandora's box, and it's going to create in third world countries more leniency, maybe in certain parts of Latin America or whatever, whereby you're going to see people move more toward a secular view of relationships.
Right. And I hope our viewers hear the love in Bobby's voice. We have covered this a number of times, but I do think, because I know Bobby well and because he and I have talked about this, that one of the reasons we're discussing this is not necessarily because of the topic of homosexuality, it's because the Pope said something extremely significant that went against the grain of the traditional view of the church. If the Pope came out and said that divorcees could get remarried and be in the church, that would be also significant. That is a significant departure from traditional Roman Catholicism teaching. And so, again, he may have talked about that in that interview. We don't know. I have not seen the interview, but this is one of the things that came out, and it is in culture. And I do think, Bobby's voice is unique in responding to this. And so I'm glad, Bobby, that you said what you said, and I full-heartedly agree with everything that you just laid out. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, Tim, I appreciate it. And I think as we wrap up, I would want to say my passion is, it really is like, so for example, I read Mein Kampf by Hitler. And the interesting thing is obviously what Hitler did was horrific, right? I mean, killing 6 million Jews in the chambers, 10 million deaths. I mean, it's just horrific. But by reading Mein Kampf, according to his worldview, he thought he was doing a morally good thing. Now, he was wrong.
Right, completely, yeah.
He might have been sincere. He was wrong. I'm not saying it, but if you were sitting down with Hitler, he would have thought he was doing the human race a good act. He would have thought of himself as somebody who was taking the very difficult, courageous step to get rid of anything that would pollute the gene pool, so that this super race, that the survival of the fittest, that we could create the best gene pool. And so he had all kinds of things going on, right? With eugenics and trying to create good genes. And Hitler would have thought, look, given his worldview of, you're looking at a naturalistic worldview. It's influenced by Darwinian evolution. And he's thinking about genetics and population genetics. And he's thinking about what's going to create the best society for him. He would have seen himself that he was going to give the gift of getting the gene pool as good as possible by killing off anything that was polluting it. Horrible, awful, fundamentally wrong. Right. But it would help. It would help you, and it would help me to understand. Wow, if we're just sitting there just throwing darts at this guy, we might miss it. But if we were able to say, you know what, Hitler, we understand the worldview by which you're operating here. And we understand that you think you're doing something good for humanity. But can we talk about something even deeper? Like, what is a person? I mean, you're reducing it down to good genes, bad genes. Like, we're talking image of God stuff here, that people have serious value because they're created in the imago Dei. And I bring that example up, Tim, simply just to say, part of the way that I'm wired is like, here I am, I'm renouncing Hitler altogether, but I would still want, what is driving him? And the crazy thing is, a lot of times these dictators and these people that seem pure evil, they actually think that they're doing something good for their cultures. And so if you just come at them and tell them you're evil, you're evil, you're evil, if that's your evangelistic strategy, they might miss it because they're perceiving themselves as doing something good. So we have to break down their perception. We have to break down their worldview. We have to understand their worldview. We have to dismantle that. We have to show them why that worldview that they're holding is so wrong. But we can't even do that if we can't enter a conversation, because we've immediately demonized each other and written each other off.
Yeah, no, that's great. Was it Aristotle that said the best way to convince somebody of their position is incorrect is to walk over to them and grab their hand and lead them over instead of just yelling at them from a distance? Was that Aristotle?
I can't recall, but that's a good statement.
Yeah, something similar to that. So again, I think one of the overarching themes of this conversation, as we're thinking about how we should vote, is to be civil. I guess one of the things in the Democratic Party, not part of the platform, is all of the humans, all of the people that are made in God's image, that wear the D proudly, Jesus loves them. He has died for them. He wants to see them be redeemed. And I think Bobby echoed that statement over and over and over again tonight in this conversation. And that goes for all people. If you wear an R or an I, or you don't vote at all, you are made in the image of God, and Jesus loves you. And that's one of the reasons that we're doing what we're doing, is so that people will know that truth and come to a saving relationship with Jesus Christ.
Thank you, Tim, so much for facilitating this conversation. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And since we interacted with KL a lot, I see him at the end. Thanks for the conversation all. And, hey, thank you, KL, for interacting and sharing your thoughts and opinions as well. We appreciate it. We see Darren on there. Darren jumps on a lot. Hope you're doing well, bro. And everybody else, God bless. And please continue to join us and share about our channel. Appreciate y'all.
Yep, and last second reminder, if you're still on, you want to check out the video that released today. It was a snippet of Dr. Craig talking about some keys to his success. So that's a really fantastic video, and we'll do the play out for the Apologetics Crash Course. It's still available. You can find it right on the homepage of our website, or you can oneminuteapologist.com/ACC. We'll go ahead and play that promo as we say goodbye.